we went in the evening to visit the cuna, which is not a fine building, but a large, healthy, airy house. At the door, where there are a porter and his wife, the babies are now given in. Formerly they were put in at the reja, at the window of the porter's lodge, but this had to be given up in consequence of the tricks played by boys or idle persons who put in dogs, cats, or dead animals. As we were going upstairs we heard an old woman singing a cheerful ditty in an awfully cracked voice, and as we got a full view of her before she could see us, we saw a clean old body sitting, sewing and singing, while a baby rolling on the floor in a state of perfect ecstasy was keeping up a sort of crowing duet with her. She seemed delighted to see these ladies, who belonged to the Junta, and led us into a large hall, where a score of nurses and babies were performing a symphony of singing, hushing, crying, lullabying, and other nursery music. All along the room were little green painted beds, and both nurses and babies looked clean and healthy. The Blanks knew every baby and nurse and directress by name. Some of the babies were remarkably pretty, and when we had admired them sufficiently, we were taken into the next hall, occupied by little girls of 2, 3, and 4 years old. They were all seated on little mats at the foot of their small green beds, a regiment of the finest and healthiest children possible. A directress in the room sewing. At our entrance they all jumped up simultaneously and surrounded us with the noisiest expressions of delight. One told me in a confidential whisper that Manuelita had thumped her own head and had a pain in it, but I could not see that Manuelita seemed to be suffering any acute agonies, for she made more noise than any of them. One little girl sidled up to me and said in a most insinuating voice, "Me llevas too?" Will you take me away with you? For even at this early age they begin to have a glimmering idea that those whom the ladies choose from amongst them are peculiarly favored. We stayed some time with them, and admired their healthy, happy, and well-fed appearance, and then proceeded to the apartment of the boys, all little things of the same age, sitting ranged in a row like senators in Congress, and, strange to say, much quieter and graver than the female babies. But this must have been from shyness, for before we came away we saw them romping in great style. The directresses seem good respectable women, and kind to the children, who, as I mentioned before, are almost all taken away and brought up by rich people, before they have time to know that there is anything peculiar or unfortunate in their situation. After this adoption they are completely on a level with the other children of the family. An equal portion is left them, and although their condition is never made a secret of, they frequently marry as well as their adopted brothers and sisters. Those who are opposed to this institution are so on the plea that it encourages and facilitates vice. That the number of children in the hospital is a proof that much vice and much poverty do exist, there is no doubt, that by enabling the vicious to conceal their guilt, or by relieving the poor from their burden, it encourages either vice or idleness, is scarcely probable. But even were it so, the certain benefits are so immense, when laid in the balance with the possible evils, that they cannot be put in competition. The mother who leaves her child at the cuna, would she not abandon it to a worse fate if this institution did not exist? If she does so to conceal her disgrace, is it not seen that a woman will stop at no cruelty to obtain this end, as exposure of her infant, even murder, and that, strong as maternal love is, the dread of the world's scorn has conquered it? If poverty be the cause, surely the misery must be great indeed, which induces the poorest beggar or the most destitute of the Indian women, whose love for their children amounts to a passion, to part with her child, and though it is suspected that the mother who has left her infant at the cuna has occasionally got herself hired as a nurse, that she may have the pleasure of bringing it up, it seems to me that no great evil can arise even from that. These orphans are thus rescued from the contamination of vice, from poverty, perhaps from the depths of depravity, perhaps their very lives are saved and great sin prevented. Hundreds of innocent children are thus placed under the care of the first and best ladies in the country, and brought up to be worthy members of society. Another day we devoted to visiting a different and more painful scene, the Acordada, or public jail, a great solid building, spacious and well ventilated. For this also there is a junta, or society of ladies of the first families, who devote themselves to teaching the female malefactors. It is painful and almost startling to see the first ladies in Mexico familiarly conversing with and embracing women who have been guilty of the most atrocious crimes, especially of murdering their husbands, which is the chief crime of the female prisoners. There are no bad faces amongst them, and probably not one who has committed a premeditated crime. A moment of jealousy during intoxication, violent passions without any curb, suddenly aroused and as suddenly extinguished, have led to these frightful results. We were first shown into a large and tolerably clean apartment, where were the female prisoners who are kept apart as being of a more decent family than the rest. Some were lying on the floor, others working, some were well dressed, others dirty and slovenly. Few looked sad. Most appeared careless and happy, and none seemed ashamed. Amongst them were some of the handsomest faces I have seen in Mexico. One good-looking common woman, with a most joyous and benevolent countenance and lame, came up to salute the ladies. I inquired what she had done. Murdered her husband, and buried him under the brick floor. Shade of Lavater. It is some comfort to hear that their husbands were generally such brutes they deserved little better. Amongst others confined here is the wife, or rather the widow, of a governor of Mexico, who made away with her husband. We did not see her, and they say she generally keeps out of the way when strangers come. One very pretty and coquettish little woman, with a most intellectual face, and very superior looking, being, in fact, a relation of Count 's, is in jail on suspicion of having poisoned her lover. A beautiful young creature, extremely like Mrs. of Boston, was among the prisoners. I did not hear what her crime was. We were attended by a woman who has the title of Presidenta, and who, after some years of good conduct, has now the charge of her fellow prisoners, but she also murdered her husband. We went upstairs, accompanied by various of these distinguished criminals, to the room looking down upon the chapel, in which room the ladies give them instruction in reading, and in the Christian doctrine. With the time which they devote to these charitable offices, together with their numerous devotional exercises, and the care which their houses and families require, it cannot be said that the life of a Mexican Señora is an idle one, nor in such cases can it be considered a useless one. We then descended to the lower regions, where, in a great damp vaulted gallery, hundreds of unfortunate women of the lowest class were occupied in Travox's forces, not indeed of a very hard description. These were employed in baking tortillas for the prisoners. Dirty, ragged, and miserable looking creatures there were in these dismal vaults, which looked like purgatory, and smelt like heaven knows what. But as I have frequently had occasion to observe in Mexico, the sense of smell is a doubtful blessing. Another large hall near this, which the prisoners were employed in cleaning and sweeping, has at least fresh air, opening on one side into a court, where poor little children, the saddest sight there, were running about, the children of the prisoners. Leaving the side of the building devoted to the women, we passed on to another gallery, looking down upon an immense paved court with a fountain, where were several hundreds of male prisoners, unfortunately collected together without any reference to the nature of their crime. The midnight murderer with the purloiner of a pocket handkerchief, the branded felon with the man guilty of some political offence, the debtor with the false coiner, so that many a young and thoughtless individual, whom a trifling fault, the result of ignorance or of unformed principles, has brought hither, must leave this place wholly contaminated and hardened by bad example and vicious conversation. Here there were indeed some ferocious, hardened-looking ruffians, but there were many mild, good-humoured faces, and I could see neither sadness nor trace of shame on any countenance; indeed, they all seemed much amused by seeing so many ladies. Some were stretched full length on the ground, doing nothing; others were making rolls for hats.